Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Baute from Politico, and before our next panel begins, I'd like to thank McKinsey for their support in today's summit. And I'm delighted to sit down now with Brooke Weddle, McKinsey's senior partner, to discuss a topic that's come up a few times already today, but we're going to go into some more detail on shipbuilding and what may lie ahead for the future of the industry. So, Brooke, thank you so much for joining.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Callie.
So for the past 18 years at McKinsey, you focused on organizational transformations across a diverse set of industries, but this year you've been focused on shipbuilding, an industry that we've heard a good bit about today and that you believe also is critical to invest in, but it's also facing a myriad of challenges. So can you give us an overview from your perspective, the current state of American shipbuilding and the most pressing challenges that you think it's facing?
Yeah, of course. And it's terrific to be here with you all today talking about such an important topic. Just to lay out an overview of the sector, I'm going to talk a lot about workforce today, so I'll start with that. Shipbuilding directly employs about 100,000 people in the U.S. You can add, for each of those workers, about 3 or 4 more to get to around 500,000 workers in the broader industrial base, for instance, suppliers around shipbuilding. In terms of economic contribution, you're looking at just over $40 billion in terms of GDP. Now, if you compare that to another sector that is critical for national security, like semiconductors, that would be around $250 billion. So shipbuilding is a big industry, but it could be bigger. And I think that's a little bit why it has come up today and why we're talking about it in this conversation. But we face a couple of challenges. And Kelly, you asked, what kind of stands in the way of strengthening shipbuilding. So first and foremost, we have a number of execution issues, meaning the Navy, the U.S. Navy, has put out a demand signal, and it's been increasing over time. And we've not been able to achieve that on the defense side. We've had program delays, and we are standing in a position now where we need to do better to meet that demand signal. On the commercial shipbuilding front, I would say that the picture is even more dire. If you look at the commercial shipbuilding market globally, you have China, South Korea, and Japan occupying about 90% of market share. The U.S.'s market share in commercial shipbuilding is 0.1%, 0.1%. So it's a huge gap, and one that we need to urgently address. The other big challenge that I'll put out there, and this has also come up this morning, is workforce. You cannot have ships without workers to build them, and critical part of the workforce is skilled trades. We have 1 million fewer skilled tradespeople today than we did in 2007, 1 million fewer. So we're in a precarious spot when it comes to the health of the workforce. And if you just take one of the skilled trades that comes up a lot, welders, the American Welding Society predicts that they need about 330,000 more welders by 2028. So that's not that far away, and that's a lot more welders. That'd be about a 50% increase in terms of the number of welders today. And what's just as important as building the pipeline is retaining those workers once they get on a shipyard. And we're not good at that either. McKinsey's looked at the cost of churn, workforce turnover on shipyards, and more broadly in manufacturing, and has found that that is costing U.S. companies over $5 billion a year. So there are a number of challenges, and it's an important and urgent topic for us to be focused on.
You started by talking about just the size of the industry overall. So can you detail a little bit more why is it so important to the economy, but also for global competitiveness?
Yeah, of course. I don't think you can understate the importance of shipbuilding to the U.S. economy and our competitiveness. And I think there are a couple different reasons. Certainly national security, and then I would say economic resilience. But before I go into each of those topics, I want to take a tiny step back, because the U.S. has been in a different spot before. If you look at the history, between World War I and World War II, the U.S. actually grew its shipbuilding sector in very big ways. So we went from producing, in terms of gross tonnage, about 1.5 million to 40 million in gross tonnage in a span of about 10 years. And we did that through thoughtful and smart industrial policy and the participation of the private sector. So I mention that because we have seen growth before, and I think that's important to acknowledge, and hopefully can give us some clues about what will be required going forward. And going back to your question, Callie, the importance to the U.S. economy and global competitiveness. Look, from a national security standpoint, I don't think it's tenable not to meet the U.S. Navy's demand signal. What's more, even the DoD relies on Chinese-built ships for critical shipping of fuel or dry goods, which, during a time of increased conflict could put us in a really uncomfortable spot. From the perspective of economic resilience, with 0.1% of commercial shipbuilding, that of course puts us in an uncomfortable spot from a supply chain perspective. And look, technology is accelerating. It's been accelerating for a while. And we can't afford to fall further behind in terms of incorporating technology into our approaches and ensuring that we can build good, safe ships faster in a cost-effective way. So, for those reasons, I would say it's critical to get this right, and we really do need to look to modernize our shipyards to be able to compete.
So when most folks think of shipbuilding, the first thing that comes to mind is probably ports with large ships and workers. But what role does McKinsey play in the industry? That might not be a logical jump that folks might make, that McKinsey is very involved in this industry, but how are you all helping the sector tap into its full potential?
Yeah, well, most people might think that McKinsey does a lot of work on strategy, and they wouldn't be wrong. And of course, we are helping shipbuilding industry with strategy, whether that has to do with digital transformation, supply chain resilience, or overall productivity. But I think the McKinsey that you may not know is the McKinsey that works down on the deck plate, if you will, in steel-toed boots, really helping to improve throughput and execution. I have my own steel-toed boots and spend a lot of time hand in hand with the folks that are trying to do better, to produce better ships. The other area where we've spent a lot of time is on the workforce, and I'm proud of the work that we've done to bring data and analytics to bear when it comes to solving workforce issues. For instance, we've used cluster analysis to really pinpoint the key drivers of attrition. Of course, compensation is important, and there's been some good forward steps on that front. But in addition, we've found pretty consistently that flexibility leading to innovating shift changes, or the relationship you have with your supervisor or your foreman to really derive meaning in your work and feel like you are valued, or the fact that you want to probably be close to good housing or have access to childcare. With this kind of data and analytics, companies can get really very precise and very particular about the kinds of interventions that are actually going to impact and result in better outcomes. And then the final area where McKinsey is spending a lot of time with respect to shipbuilding is in leadership. And what I mean is that when you look at what needs to happen in the shipbuilding industry, we do need a different kind of leadership. We need to be thinking differently. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about, what does 21st century leadership mean? Well, it means you're more adaptable. You're more resilient. There's a lot to be said for servant leadership these days. And so we are helping leaders across the industry, whether you are a foreman on the deck plate or an executive in the corporate office, really think differently about how to lead the way and lead your people to drive not just lower attrition, but also different outcomes for the industry.
So how do you think we can motivate more leaders to do the same to incentivize this next generation of shipbuilding talent?
Well, I'll tell you what motivates me. I come from a military family. both my grandfathers were fought in 3 wars each. My grandmother served in the Asia Pacific Theater with the American Red Cross. My husband, my brother, my dad, I could go on. I was the black sheep that decided to earn a PhD versus a military uniform. And so shipbuilding for me is a way of serving my country and taking pride in that. And frankly, I think it's probably the motivation for a lot of people in this room, and could be for many more, especially young people that need to be inspired. You know, I think about what we could do to change the perceptions of young people in particular. I think some interesting things are happening. You see TikTok videos highlighting electricians and plumbers and making that work look different. You know, my 12-year-old son spends a lot of time in video games. We should have more skilled trades and shipbuilding, right, take place in those kinds of environments as well. And I would say we even need a Hollywood movie to really get people thinking differently about the role shipbuilding can play in terms of our national security and, you know, our country's path forward from an economic perspective.
We're about to get the hook here, but hang on, a Hollywood movie, who would you cast in that movie? If it was a summer blockbuster, we're going to see it, who's on the marquee?
Okay, well, that's a really important question. I would go for smart and strong, so I would go for someone like John Krasinski. I would channel a little bit of salt energy with Angelina Jolie. I think she would be good in there.
You're going to pull her back out.
Yeah, yeah. And then I probably would go, you have to have that like guy that's been there, done that. I'm a little bit partial to Tom Cruise for that one.
Oh, okay. So take him from the air to the ship.
Yeah,
I see.
yeah,
But there's nowhere for him to run, so how's he going to do it? Anyways, Brooke, we could keep talking about Hollywood, but there's so much more we could talk about with shipbuilding too. But unfortunately, we are out of time, but so much appreciate your time and your valuable insights, and appreciate McKinsey's support for our summit in this conversation.
Thank you, Kelly.